Freddy Martinez had 48 hours before losing everything. What he found instead was $80 million in frozen gold. Beneath 12 feet of ice, a sound like gunfire cracked the earth wide open. Freddy stared into that glowing crack and swore the permafrost was breathing. But 2 days earlier, he was just another broke miner counting his last $17,000. And before we reveal how it all turned around, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe, because this is one discovery you don't want to miss. Picture this. You've spent 3 years chasing gold in the Klondike. Your bulldozers are being repossessed. Your crew has abandoned you. And you're holding an eviction notice with your name on it. That's where Freddy stood on a Tuesday morning, watching repo trucks haul away his dreams. His hands shook, not from the cold, but from knowing those $17,000 were all that separated him from homelessness in the most dangerous place on earth. The repo man, a weathered Yukon local named Bill Hutchins, shook his head as he chained the last excavator. "Third miner this month, Freddy. Maybe it's time to head south before winter kills you." Freddy's throat tightened. South meant admitting defeat. South meant crawling back to his ex-wife in Phoenix, hearing her say, "I told you so," for the rest of his life. South meant explaining to his 8-year-old daughter why Daddy couldn't make his dreams work. "This was supposed to be our year, Emma," he whispered to the photo in his wallet. A little girl, missing 2 front teeth, holding a crayon drawing of mountains and gold nuggets. She'd made it for him before he left Arizona, convinced her daddy was going to strike it rich and buy her a pony. Footsteps crunched through snow behind him. Juan Kowalski emerged from the trees, clutching something against his chest like his life depended on it. "Freddy." Juan's breath formed ice crystals that caught the morning light. "I found it. Aurora Creek. Now imagine you're desperate enough to bet everything on a name that makes hardened miners cross themselves. Because Aurora Creek wasn't just any legend. Juan's grandfather, Stefan Kowalski, had whispered that name like a prayer before he died in a Whitehorse nursing home. The old man had been a surveyor in the 1960s, mapping remote territories for the Canadian government. He'd found survey markers from the original 1902 Norwegian expedition, 3 prospectors named Erik Johansson, Niels Andersson, and Olaf Lindqvist. "My grandfather never forgot what he saw in those old documents," Juan explained, his voice barely audible over the Arctic wind. Hand-drawn maps showing gold concentrations that defied belief. Stream beds lined with nuggets the size of goose eggs. But the Norwegians never extracted more than a handful before winter storms trapped them. The official records said the 3 men froze to death in their cabin, overcome by carbon monoxide from a faulty stove. But Stefan Kowalski had read their final journal entries before the government sealed the documents. The Norwegians hadn't died from gas poisoning. They died from fear. "They wrote about watchers in the shadows," Juan continued. "Something that moved between the trees at night. Something that made them paranoid, sleepless, convinced the very ground was alive and hungry." Juan pulled out satellite thermal imaging that made Freddy's heart skip. Underground water flow traced exactly where his grandfather's stories placed the lost creek. But thermal readings showed something that should have been impossible. The entire deposit was locked under 12 feet of permafrost that hadn't thawed since the Little Ice Age. Modern geological surveys suggested the permafrost formed during the Younger Dryas period, roughly 12,000 years ago, when global temperatures plummeted and stayed frozen for over a millennium. Any gold deposits beneath that ice would be perfectly preserved, untouched by centuries of mining activity. "We pool everything," Juan whispered, his eyes burning with desperate intensity. 40,000 total. One shot before the corporations claim every decent ground in the territory. Freddy stared at those thermal images. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about proving the impossible was real. about giving his daughter a story worth telling, about not crawling back to Phoenix as another failed dreamer. But Parker Schnabel thought they were signing their death warrants. Parker had been working a claim 15 miles south when word reached him about Freddy and Juan's Aurora Creek plan. He drove up in his truck, bringing his crew chief Mitch and mechanic Danny, all of them wearing expressions that mixed concern with disbelief. Parker shook his head when he saw Juan's maps spread across Freddy's kitchen table. Aurora Creek? That place eats miners alive. My grandfather warned me about that ground when I was 12 years old. Parker's grandfather, John Schnabel, had been legendary in these parts. He'd worked claims throughout the Klondike for over 30 years, extracting millions in gold and learning every dangerous secret the territory held. John Schnabel didn't scare easily, but Aurora Creek had terrified him. 3 separate crews tried working that ground in the 80s, Parker continued. The Morrison brothers went first, experienced miners with proper equipment and backing. They lasted 6 weeks before abandoning everything and fleeing south. Never explained why, just packed up in the middle of the night and disappeared. Mitch studied Juan's temperature readings, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Boss, look at this thermal data. That creek bed sits in a natural depression that acts like a freezer. Cold air sinks and gets trapped. Even in peak summer, temperatures down there never get above freezing." Danny, who'd seen more equipment failures than any mechanic in the Yukon, pointed to elevation markers on the satellite images. "See how the terrain forms a bowl? Any warm air just flows right out. It's like nature designed that place to stay frozen forever." Despite every warning, despite the obvious dangers, Freddy and Juan pressed forward with reckless determination. They started with rental equipment, a modest excavator and industrial heating unit that should have been sufficient for normal permafrost conditions. The frozen ground laughed at their efforts. Hydraulic hammers that could crack concrete bounced off the ice like toys. Steam injectors designed for Arctic construction work froze solid within minutes of operation. "It's not natural," Juan muttered after their 3rd day of futile attempts. "This isn't just frozen ground. It's like the ice is fighting back." They upgraded to military surplus equipment, heating units originally designed for Alaskan pipeline construction, steam injection systems used for Arctic oil drilling, even experimental thermal lances borrowed from mining operations in Siberia. Nothing penetrated more than 18 inches into the permafrost. After 2 weeks of constant effort, $18,000 had evaporated into frozen mud and equipment rental fees. Their modest camp looked like a graveyard of broken machinery. Freddy stood in -30 temperatures, his breath forming ice clouds as he stared at the unmarked permafrost that refused to yield. "We're finished," he muttered, feeling each lost dollar like a physical wound. Emma's crayon drawing was getting worn from being handled, the mountains and gold nuggets fading from his nervous fingers. Maybe some dreams are too big for broke miners. But Juan refused to surrender. While Freddy wrestled with despair, Juan worked 18-hour days in his makeshift laboratory, a heated shed filled with salvaged electronics, geology textbooks, and experimental equipment he'd built from scrap parts. Juan's background in seismic engineering gave him insights that traditional miners lacked. Instead of attacking permafrost with brute force, he developed a revolutionary approach using sonic disruption technology. The theory was radical. Targeted sound waves could create resonance fractures in ice formations, weakening structural integrity without requiring massive heat input. "Think of it like shattering crystal with a soprano's high note," Juan explained, showing Freddy his cobbled-together sonic array. "Find the right frequency, and ice that's strong as concrete becomes as fragile as glass." At 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, Juan's experimental equipment achieved critical resonance. The sound started as a low hum, building to frequencies that made their teeth ache. Then came the breakthrough, a crack like thunder as frozen earth split along natural stress lines. Their first test excavation revealed something that made both men forget how to breathe. Dark soil rich with gold flakes, and nestled in the ancient gravel, a single nugget weighing 2.3 ounces, worth $4,300 at current gold prices. But here's what made their blood freeze solid. The nugget seemed to pulse with inner light, exactly like the Norwegian journals had described over a century ago. "This changes everything," Juan whispered, holding the specimen up to his headlamp. The gold caught the LED beam and appeared to breathe, glowing with an intensity that seemed impossible for mere metal. If there's one nugget this size in a test hole, there could be hundreds more in the main deposit. Word spread through the mining community faster than Arctic wildfire. The Klondike network of prospectors, claim jumpers, and equipment dealers operated like a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business within hours. By Thursday morning, suspicious vehicles had been spotted on access roads near Aurora Creek. Friday brought drone overflights by unknown operators. Saturday morning, 3 different claim jumpers showed up asking pointed questions about Freddy and Juan's activities. But the real threat came from corporate interests with resources that dwarfed anything individual miners could muster. Yukon Consolidated Mining, a billion-dollar multinational corporation with legal teams, government connections, and unlimited appetite for profitable acquisitions, had noticed unusual activity in previously ignored territory. That's when Parker Schnabel made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Parker arrived at Aurora Creek on Sunday morning with his entire crew and enough heavy equipment to supply a small army. His convoy included 2 massive excavators, a bulldozer, heating equipment worth over $200,000, and enough fuel to run operations through the harshest winter conditions. "I've been mining these hills for 15 years, Parker told Freddy and Juan, his breath forming ice clouds in the -20 air. "I've seen rich ground and poor ground, easy claims and impossible ones. But I've never seen gold concentrations testing this rich from a single test hole." Parker's crew had run independent assays on samples Freddy shared with local buyers. The results defied every expectation. 47 ounces per cubic yard in gold-bearing material that should have been picked clean by a century of mining activity. "But here's the thing," Parker continued, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. "You're going to need serious firepower to extract what's down there before corporate lawyers shut you down permanently." Yukon Consolidated has been filing territorial challenges on every productive claim in the region. They'll find environmental violations, boundary disputes, or safety concerns, whatever it takes to seize promising ground. The partnership formed with handshakes and profit-sharing agreements that seemed too good to be true. Parker would provide equipment and expertise in exchange for a 30% share of extraction proceeds. Freddy and Juan would retain control of the claim while gaining access to industrial-grade mining operations. The combined assault on Aurora Creek's permafrost began at dawn on Monday morning. Parker's massive excavators worked alongside Juan's sonic disruption arrays, creating a mining operation unlike anything the Klondike had ever witnessed. Steam clouds rose like geysers from ground that hadn't been disturbed since woolly mammoths walked the earth. The sonic equipment weakened permafrost along natural fracture lines, while industrial heating units targeted the softened areas with concentrated thermal energy. For the first time in 2 weeks, they were making measurable progress against ice formations that had defeated every previous attempt. Results exceeded every optimistic projection. Their first major excavation revealed gold concentrations that shattered modern mining records, 47 ounces per cubic yard, in material so rich it seemed almost artificial. Individual nuggets emerged from ancient gravel, weighing 5, 8, even 12 ounces each. The crew worked in stunned silence as specimen after specimen appeared from permafrost deposits that represented thousands of years of geological accumulation. Each shovelful of material contained enough gold to pay most miners' expenses for weeks, but extraordinary success triggered attention from predators far more dangerous than claim jumpers or territorial disputes. Wednesday morning brought the first sign of organized surveillance. Their fuel delivery man, Tom Mackenzie, mentioned unusual questions from strangers asking about equipment purchases and mining activities in the Aurora Creek area. 3 different people approached me this week, Tom explained while unloading diesel fuel. Professional types, not miners. They knew specific details about your operation, equipment models, fuel consumption rates, even crew schedules. Someone's watching you boys real close. Thursday morning revealed the true scope of their problem. Juan discovered their excavators wouldn't start, despite perfect mechanical condition the previous evening. Investigation revealed fuel tanks contaminated with sand, not accidental contamination, but deliberate sabotage using precise amounts of silica designed to destroy engine components without immediate detection. Thursday night brought more sophisticated attacks. Hydraulic lines on their primary excavator were sliced clean through with surgical precision, causing catastrophic fluid loss that rendered the machine inoperable. The cuts showed tool marks consistent with professional industrial equipment, not random vandalism. Friday morning delivered the discovery that transformed paranoia into justified terror. Juan found tiny black devices hidden throughout their camp. Under mess tent tables, inside equipment compartments, even taped to the underside of their sleeping quarters. Professional-grade surveillance equipment. Military specification listening devices, capable of transmitting encrypted signals over vast distances. Someone with unlimited resources was monitoring their every conversation, tracking their every movement, documenting their every discovery. "We're not fighting permafrost anymore," Parker told his assembled crew during an emergency meeting. "We're fighting people with unlimited money who know exactly what we found down there. People who want us gone permanently." The surveillance equipment suggested corporate interests far beyond typical mining claim disputes. Yukon Consolidated Mining operated extraction facilities throughout northern Canada, but their business model focused on large-scale industrial operations, not individual prospector acquisitions. Someone bigger was involved, someone with resources to conduct military-grade surveillance operations, someone who understood the true significance of what lay beneath Aurora Creek's permafrost. The paranoia crept in like frostbite, starting small and spreading until it consumed every aspect of daily life. Footsteps in snow outside camp during the darkest hours of Arctic night. Shadows moving between trees where no human should be walking. Equipment malfunctions that seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Juan started sleeping with a loaded rifle beside his bunk, jumping awake at sounds that might have been wind or might have been something else. Danny began checking and rechecking equipment for sabotage, finding subtle tampering that suggested professional training in industrial disruption. "Someone's out there," Juan whispered during a 2 a.m. security patrol. "I can feel eyes on us every time we step outside. They're watching, waiting for something." Underground exploration revealed why corporate interests were desperate to control their operation. Ground-penetrating radar surveys showed the Aurora Creek deposit extended far beyond surface indicators, following an ancient river system through subterranean chambers that stretched for miles beneath the permafrost. Geological analysis suggested the underground network connected multiple unexplored territories, creating a potential mining empire worth hundreds of millions in extractable gold. Initial surveys estimated over 8,000 ounces in immediately accessible deposits, with potential for 10 times that amount in deeper formations. But accessing the main deposits required descending into chambers where temperatures never rose above -10 degrees Fahrenheit, where centuries of methane buildup created explosive atmospheres, and where structural collapse could trap miners permanently in frozen tombs hundreds of feet below ground level. Marcus Webb arrived on a Wednesday morning like a well-dressed harbinger of corporate doom. Yukon Consolidated's head of territorial acquisitions stepped out of a chartered helicopter wearing a $1,000 Arctic parka and the Predator's smile that came with unlimited legal authority. "Gentlemen," Webb's voice cut through howling wind like a blade through silk, "you're sitting on a geological anomaly worth potentially hundreds of millions in extractable resources. We're prepared to offer $15 million for immediate buyout and territorial transfer." Parker spat tobacco juice into the snow, the brown stain steaming in -30 air. "Not for sale, city boy. Find your own gold." Webb's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold as the permafrost beneath their feet. "Everything's for sale, Mr. Schnabel. Some things just cost more than money. Consider our offer carefully. It's significantly more generous than what usually happens to miners who operate in territories beyond their capabilities." That night, their primary generator mysteriously failed, despite perfect mechanical condition and recent maintenance. Emergency backup systems had been sabotaged with professional precision, leaving them without heat or power in temperatures that could kill within hours. Only Juan's emergency repair skills and Danny's mechanical expertise prevented a catastrophic equipment failure that would have forced immediate evacuation. But the message was clear: cooperation or consequences. The psychological warfare escalated beyond equipment sabotage into personal intimidation. Mitch found his truck's brake lines severed after a supply run to Dawson City. Danny discovered his sleeping bag had been slashed with military-grade cutting tools during a shift change. Most disturbing, their satellite communication equipment began receiving encrypted transmissions during the deepest hours of Arctic night. Coded messages in languages none of them recognized, broadcast on frequencies that required government-level access to utilize. "They're not just watching us," Parker muttered, studying printouts of the mysterious transmissions. "They're coordinating something bigger. Something that requires more resources than claim jumping or territorial disputes." The first major catastrophe struck at 2:15 a.m. on Friday morning, with the sound of thunder echoing across the frozen landscape. A primary support timber cracked under shifting permafrost pressure, triggering a catastrophic structural failure that sent 40,000 cubic yards of frozen earth roaring into their main excavation tunnel. The cave-in happened with terrifying speed. One moment, night shift workers were extracting gold-bearing material from the deepest chamber. The next, emergency alarms were screaming as tons of permafrost collapsed into spaces that had been stable for thousands of years. The ground shook for miles, rattling windows in Dawson City and triggering seismic monitors throughout the Yukon Territory. Two miners, Tommy Rodriguez and Kevin Chang, barely escaped the collapsing tunnel, crawling through debris as their headlamps flickered and emergency radios crackled with static. 3 excavators worth over $600,000 disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by an avalanche of frozen earth that buried months of careful excavation in minutes. Emergency response protocols kicked in as crews scrambled to account for personnel and assess the scope of destruction. When emergency lighting finally penetrated the chaos and dust settled enough to see clearly, silence hung over the disaster site like a burial shroud. But as rescue teams prepared for the worst, their headlamps revealed something that transformed catastrophe into legend. The landslide had exposed a natural underground vault where prehistoric floods had concentrated gold deposits over geological time frames that staggered imagination. The chamber stretched beyond their lights, containing compressed layers of gold-bearing material extending 20 feet deep through gravel that glittered like crushed stars. Jesus Christ, Mitch whispered, playing his headlamp beam across walls of pure quartz, shot through with veins of gold so rich they seemed painted with molten lightning. It's like the mountain decided to show us its treasure room. But something else emerged from the ancient gravel that no geological survey had predicted. Something that changed Aurora Creek from a mining claim into an archaeological mystery that attracted attention from universities, government agencies, and institutions nobody wanted to identify. Fossilized tools mixed with gold nuggets in combinations that defied explanation. Carved bone fragments bearing symbols that matched no known indigenous cultures. Stone implements that showed evidence of advanced mining techniques from civilizations that predated recorded history by thousands of years. The artifacts were perfectly preserved in permafrost that had protected them from oxidation, decay, or contamination for millennia. Carbon dating would later place the oldest specimens at over 5,000 years, making them among the earliest evidence of organized mining activity in North America. Who the hell was extracting gold from Aurora Creek before the Norwegians? Parker muttered, examining a stone chisel embedded in gold-bearing quartz. And what happened to them? The surveillance equipment hidden throughout their camp had been recording conversations about discoveries they never discussed publicly. Professional analysis of the listening devices revealed encryption capabilities and transmission ranges that suggested military or intelligence agency origins. Someone with government-level resources was monitoring not just their gold extraction, but their archaeological findings. The implications sent chills through the crew that had nothing to do with Arctic temperatures. Juan studied the carved symbols on ancient tools, comparing them to references in his grandfather's journals. Stefan Kowalski's survey work in the 1960s had uncovered similar artifacts in remote territories, but government authorities had classified the findings and sealed all documentation. "My grandfather said the earth up here was hungry," Juan whispered, tracing carved patterns that seemed to shift in flickering lamplight. "Said it swallowed men who got too greedy, kept their bones as warnings for others." Indigenous elders from nearby communities began arriving at Aurora Creek without invitation or explanation. They performed ceremonies using sage smoke and traditional chants, speaking in languages that predated European contact. When asked about their activities, the elders simply said they were putting things back to sleep. The psychological pressure of constant surveillance, equipment sabotage, and inexplicable archaeological discoveries began affecting crew morale in ways that went beyond normal mining stress. Sleep became difficult, despite exhausting physical labor. Appetite disappeared even though Arctic conditions demanded massive caloric intake. Strange dreams plagued everyone on site. Vivid nightmares about being watched by something ancient and patient. Something that had been waiting beneath the ice for centuries. Danny started finding footprints around his sleeping quarters that matched no boots worn by anyone in camp. But the gold kept coming. Despite every obstacle, every mysterious setback, every indication that Aurora Creek wanted to remain undisturbed, extraction continued at unprecedented rates. Specialized recovery equipment removed gold-bearing material layer by carefully documented layer, revealing centuries of accumulated wealth in concentrations that exceeded famous historical strikes from California, Alaska, and the original Klondike gold rush of 1896. The richest sections yielded over 300 ounces per cubic yard, numbers that sounded impossible until scales confirmed the reality. Individual nuggets emerged weighing 15, 20, even 25 ounces each, with purity levels approaching 95% natural gold. The largest individual specimen weighed 47.3 ounces, making it one of the biggest authenticated nuggets ever recovered from Klondike territory. Conservative collector estimates placed its value at over $200,000, far exceeding standard gold commodity pricing. But the ancient artifacts raised questions that made everyone uncomfortable. The fossilized tools suggested organized mining operations thousands of years before recorded history. The carved symbols implied cultural knowledge that contradicted accepted archaeological timelines. Most disturbing, analysis of the artifacts revealed trace elements of gold processing, evidence that ancient miners had developed techniques for purifying raw ore that wouldn't be rediscovered by European cultures for millennia. Who had been working Aurora Creek before the Norwegians? What had they discovered that was worth protecting with sophisticated mining operations? And what had happened to them? Total extraction reached 4,267 ounces over 6 weeks of intensive mining operations that pushed equipment and human endurance beyond safe operational limits. Base gold value at current market prices of $1,875 per ounce approached $8 million in raw commodity value. Premium historical specimens, authenticated artifacts, and collector-grade nuggets added an additional $12 million in specialized market value. Mineral rights to connected underground chambers suggested potentially $60 million in future extraction opportunities. $80 million. From a $40,000 investment based on legends and thermal imaging. But as crews prepared for winter shutdown and equipment winterization, seismic monitoring equipment detected increasing ground movement that defied geological explanation. Micro-earthquakes occurred every few hours with mechanical regularity, suggesting underground changes that followed patterns rather than random tectonic activity. "Something's happening down there," Juan muttered, studying seismic readings that showed steadily increasing activity in areas they'd never excavated. "Something we triggered, but can't control." Marcus Webb's corporate surveillance teams disappeared overnight, abandoning hundreds of thousands of dollars in monitoring equipment without explanation or retrieval attempts. Government officials who had been demanding environmental impact studies stopped returning phone calls. Most disturbing, indigenous communities throughout the Yukon began evacuating traditional territories, moving families south with urgency that suggested knowledge of approaching danger that outsiders didn't understand. "They say we woke something up," Mitch whispered after speaking with tribal representatives who refused to explain their ceremonies. "Something that's been sleeping under the ice for thousands of years. Something that should have stayed asleep." The seismic activity intensified as winter deepened and temperatures dropped below -40 for sustained periods. Ground movement patterns showed increasing organization, as if underground forces were responding to surface disturbances with calculated precision. Deep beneath Aurora Creek's permafrost, something was stirring back to life, something that had been dormant since the last ice age, something that the ancient miners had encountered, feared, and tried to contain with their sophisticated extraction operations. As Klondike winter closed around their mining operation like a frozen fist, instruments registered tremors that seemed increasingly deliberate. The movement patterns matched no known geological phenomenon. They were too regular, too organized, too much like the breathing of something vast and patient. Freddy Martinez counted $80 million in gold and artifacts while watching seismic monitors register activity that suggested their excavation had awakened something that had been sleeping for millennia. The fossilized tools implied ancient civilizations had faced the same discovery. The Norwegian journals mentioned watchers in shadows. Indigenous warnings spoke of hungry earth. What if the gold had never been Aurora Creek's real treasure? What if it had always been bait, protecting something far more valuable and dangerous that lay deeper beneath the permafrost? In the deepest excavation chambers, temperatures began rising for the first time in over 100 years. Ice that had been solid since the Pleistocene epoch was melting from below, suggesting heat sources that existed far beneath anything their equipment could reach. The permafrost was melting from the inside out. Whatever slept beneath Aurora Creek was generating its own warmth as it stirred back to consciousness after thousands of years of frozen dormancy. Their $80 million fortune might have been the most expensive wake-up call in geological history. The ancient miners had found the same deposits, extracted the same incredible wealth, and faced the same consequences for disturbing ground that was meant to remain frozen forever. Just like in 1902, they'd struck gold beyond imagination. Just like in 1902, the ground beneath Aurora Creek had begun to breathe. And just like the Norwegians, who never made it out alive, they were about to discover what lay beneath the treasure. In the silence of Arctic night, something ancient was stirring back to life. Something that made $80 million look like pocket change compared to the price of awakening it. Freddy Martinez's 48 hours to lose everything had become a countdown to something far worse than bankruptcy. It had become the timer on a geological alarm clock that had been set thousands of years ago, waiting for the right combination of greed and technology to wake what should have slept forever.